Hi, everybody. I'm Ann Roberts, and this is a reading from Furthest From The Gate, a story of a coming-of-age story involving Kate Mitchell, a young girl as she grows up and realizes that she's gay. This particular story takes place when Kate is about 8 years old, and it's called The Omniscient Omnipotent. Third grade will always be remembered as the most trying of my educational years, mainly because of my teacher, Mrs. Angle, but also because of Sister Mary Elizabeth Donahue, my CCD teacher. Besides enduring Mrs. Angle 5 days a week, I got the privilege of sitting through 90 minutes of instruction from the oldest nun on the face of the earth, a nun who believed Vatican II and the 20th century had never happened. Catholic Christian doctrine is a fancy name for Sunday school. Every week after Mass, I and the other 8-year-old martyrs suffered under Sister Mary's tutelage, learning what we'd done to deserve the fiery pits of hell or what we'd do to get there. She tried her best to scare us, but no one took her seriously. What could happen if we misbehaved or didn't do our homework? She could throw us out, but secretly everyone was praying that would happen anyway. The only real leverage she had against us was our parents, but since most of them had experienced CCD, they were tacitly sympathetic, insisting that we go, but understanding that it was to follow church doctrine and ease their soaring Catholic guilt. Thus, by divine perpetual motion, I found myself facing Sister Mary every Sunday, a rather unpleasant sight on the Lord's Day. We called her Scary Mary. Her face reminded me of a Rand McNally road map, a bunch of bisecting lines with a few points of interest along the way, most especially her eyes. They receded back into her head, making the sockets appear large and empty. As for the rest of her body, who knew? She could have been a minotaur underneath her robe, and no one would have suspected. As third graders, it was Scary's responsibility to prepare us for the third of the 7 sacraments, confession, which required 8-year-olds to sit in a tiny dark room, the only furniture a kneeler facing a small curtained window. The priest sat in an adjacent room, and when he heard a confessor enter, he slid the partition open but kept the curtain drawn. Thus, the confession could be heard, but the identity of the sinner remained anonymous. I still remember the claustrophobic feeling that came over me every time I knelt in the confessional. Only in the name of God could a child be locked in a closet for his own good. As Sister Mary explained the concept of listing our sins for Father Horton and his assignment of penance, the class was enthralled. Sister Mary assured us that Father Horton received divine guidance and that our punishments for offending the Lord were sound. Pretty Alicia Walker looked up, her eyes popping out of her head. "You mean God talks to Father Horton?" "Of course," Sister Mary twittered. Although she looked like a hag, Sister Mary had the voice of a bird. "Why doesn't he talk to me?" Joey Dougal stammered. "Because you are not a priest." "Does he talk to you, Sister Mary?" Alicia asked. Sister Mary stuck her hands in her robe and paced the floor. "Well, Alicia, God talks to me, but it's not the same. Priests have a direct link to the Almighty, something the rest of us lack." Joey Dougal almost leapt out of his chair. "You mean like a hotline to God? Like the red phone the president carries around?" "Exactly," Sister Mary exclaimed. She had to be thrilled. This was the most excited anyone in the class had ever been about anything. "So if I became a priest, I could talk to God too," Joey shouted. "Of course," Sister Mary agreed, already picturing Joey in his vestments. Joey slugged me in the arm. "Ha ha, Katie, I can be a priest and you can't, ha." I shot out of my chair, ready to pummel him. "You shut up, Joey. I can do anything you can do." I turned toward Sister Mary for affirmation. "I could be a priest. Couldn't I, Sister Mary?" She sighed. "No, Katie. The priesthood is for men only. Women become nuns." A touch of remorse permeated her voice. I stamped my foot. "But I want to be a priest." "Now, Katie, you can be a nun," she said patiently. "But I can't be a priest." I slumped back in my chair and forgot where I was. "That's a pisser." Sister Mary's face turned dark brown. Some people turn red when they're furious, but Scary looked like she'd just come back from vacation in Florida. A long finger emerged from her robe and pointed at me. Kate Mitchell, you will not say that word again in this class, and I expect you to tell Father Horton about your foul mouth next week during confession. I assumed a penitent pose, bowing my head and staring at my desk, all the while thinking about what a stupid religion I was stuck in. I could be a much better priest than Joey. He was so damn klutzy. He'd probably dropped the baby the first time he performed a baptism. It seemed so unfair, and I knew it was wrong. I'd heard a woman named Gloria Steinem talk about something called sexism. I wasn't sure I totally understood it, but I was pretty sure she wasn't Catholic. There was something else that really bothered me. Sister Mary had said that God talked to Father Horton. It didn't take a genius to understand the implications. God knew everything, which meant that if God was a blabbermouth, then Father Horton knew everything too. This scared the hell out of me. I thought of the multitude of sins I'd committed just in the past week. I thought of the donuts my friend Robbie Wentworth and I had stolen last week during fellowship. Then there was Janie Freeman's Barbie doll, now burned beyond recognition and hiding under my bed. What about the pet lizard I'd secretly been keeping in my dresser drawer? It was amazing Father Horton had time to say Mass in the midst of tallying my transgressions alone. And what about past sins? I thought of Robbie and me in the bathroom playing doctor. And Kimmy Lancaster, a little girl that I really liked looking at. Sister Mary had once mentioned homo-somethings and said they were the worst type of sinners. At the time, I'd thought of Kimmy Lancaster, but I couldn't remember why. My hand shot up in the air. Sister Mary! Sister Mary ignored my violent waving until she'd finished telling a story about a little boy who'd gone to hell. Yes, Katie? My heart thumped. Sister Mary, you said God talked to Father Horton, right? Her face browned. Yes, Katie, that is correct. And God knows everything? She noticed my panic expression, and at first she looked puzzled, but then a smile crossed her face as our minds met. Yes, Katie. Everything. By Sunday, I was an emotional disaster. I had spent the entire week thinking of confession and terrorizing my family and friends, hoping to camouflage my thoughts of Kimmy Lancaster with these recent sins. I prayed I was right, otherwise the 3 weeks grounding I'd just received for jumping off the roof and into the mulberry tree would be in vain. As I waited my turn to enter the confessional, I wrung my hands and stared at the enormous crucifix above the altar. The other kids ahead of me had made lists of their sins, unaware that Father Horton already knew what they were going to say. I watched them read and reread their papers, attempting to commit their sins to memories before they entered the dark closet. Joey Dougal exited the confessional, mumbling his penance over and over. Penance was the other thing that worried me. What would be my punishment? Would this involve physical labor? Would it affect my allowance? What if I couldn't do the penance? Would I have to go back to confession? Before I realized what was happening, I'd entered the confessional. While the door was open, the room didn't seem so bad. But as I knelt, the door swung shut and the room turned black. I could hear myself breathing and the faint murmur of Father Horton talking to the sinner on the other side. My eyes adjusted and I looked around the confessional, straining to see what lurked in the corners. I thought of 2 glimmering eyes. God's eyes. Grandma always said God made his presence known when you least expected him. I wondered if that was how he knew everything, by hiding in the shadows and lurking in closets. It occurred to me that God must be pretty busy. There was a good chance that he could only talk to Father Horton once in a while. Since there were lots of other priests, surely Father Horton wasn't the only one talking to God. I sighed with relief as I pictured God with his priest yellow pages in hand and the phone cradled against his ear. I was so deep in thought that I didn't hear the window slide open. The patient father must have sat there for a good minute before saying, "Hello? Is anyone there?" I nearly fell off the kneeler at the sound of his baritone voice. It made me wonder if I wasn't speaking to the Almighty himself. This was a possibility I hadn't explored. Maybe God possessed Father Horton during confession, just like in that book, The Exorcist, a book I wasn't even supposed to touch, but had during my rampant sin spree that week. He waited. I waited. He coughed. "You may begin, my child." My mind went blank. This was like some horrible test. I stammered. He kibitzed and gave me the first line. Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. I continued, and things were going smoothly until we got to the actual confessing part. I didn't know what to say. I certainly knew what I wasn't going to say. Father, if you're a priest, don't you already know my sins? He coughed. What do you mean, my child? Well, Sister Mary said you talked with God, and since he knows all our sins, I thought he would have told you before I got here. More coughing. What Sister Mary meant was, why don't you just refresh my memory? Oh, okay. I hadn't counted on Father Horton being forgetful. I said pisser to Sister Mary. She told me to tell you that. And a good thing you did. I rattled off the many childhood pranks I'd pulled that week, and I wondered if I should mention the donut heist. Is that all, my child? Father, can I confess someone else's sins? What? Robbie Wentworth stole 4 donuts during fellowship last week. Oh, he did he? Yeah, 2 Boston cream, a glazed, and a chocolate honey dip. He was going to take more, but Mr. Mathers turned around. Why did Robbie take 4 donuts? He was hungry? I don't think so, Father Horton replied. I think you stole those donuts and you feel guilty. I pictured his steel eyes staring at me just like they had last year when a few of us put milk in the holy water. Katie, are you all right? Yes, Father. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. He'd said my name. Katie, you stole those donuts, didn't you? Yes, Father. Very well. Say 3 Hail Marys and 2 Our Fathers. Yes, Father. And in the future, Katie, do not steal and do not lie. I nodded, forgetting that he couldn't see me. He started to shut the window. Father? The window stopped. I could see his silhouette clearly. Yes, my child. How did you know it was me? There was a long pause. How do you think I knew? I gasped, ran out of the confessional, and slammed the door. Several of the other children stared at me, and the next student opened the door carefully, wondering what lurked on the other side. I leaned against the wall for a few seconds. When I finally started breathing again, I heard laughter. Someone must have been confessing something really funny, because Father Horton was laughing hysterically.